G'day and welcome to Australian Survivor Desktop episode 3. I'm Jack. Today we're diving into the 18th episode of the series. 7 survivors left. Emmett goes home. Bit of a twist, not really. I'll explain why I don't think that's a bad move from Hayley in a minute. But let's start from the start. Really enjoyed Andrew calling out George in this episode. Telling him basically no one believes you and you're a liar was fantastic. Then telling him, mate, piss off, we're having a chat. And George having to scurry away was incredibly enjoyable. The editing of Andrew is really interesting. I know people like to analyse the editing. Is it giving us a clue? Andrew's taken more and more screen time. Seems like he could be someone who they're winding up as a final 3 person. I mean, at this stage, only 7 left. Half of them are going to the final 3. Hayley gives a great summary of George's malfeasance, but she still gives him too much credit. Like the idea that these survivors are out there talking about how strategic he is and how smart he is. Like, I don't think he's any of those things. I think he's a madman. He's just a chaos agent. But he still survives because he is a cockroach. I actually don't think, with George, I don't think there is a Survivor contestant in history. I can't think of a single one who's created so much chaos, so much tension, burnt so many bridges, done so much untrustworthy, flipping, duplicitous shit, and still survived to this point. It is insane that he's still there. And we will talk about this, and actually we'll talk about it now. Do we think that people will vote for George? Like, will people, if he gets to the final 3, will people vote for him and say yes? Now, if he's got Way and Cara next to him, then he's obviously going to win Survivor. But if he's next to Hayley, next to Andrew, next to Danny, next to Flick, are people going to vote for him? I certainly couldn't. I don't think I could ever bring myself to vote for him unless something truly strange happens. But because I just don't think his gameplay is strategic at all. I think, as I said, it's just chaos. Like he confuses activity with productivity and efficiency and effectiveness. If he just does 1,000 things, some of them are bound to stick. He continues to survive the unsurvivable situations. And the problem with that is that he will get to the end and spit a narrative that explains how this was one big master plan. Did this factor into Hayley's decision? I don't know. Does she think that people will buy George's bullshit at the end? I don't know. But it's something to consider. Do people think that anyone would vote for George? I know Emmett's not voting for him. I know a lot of people. I certainly just could not bring myself to award him the title of sole survivor. So he might be someone that's worth taking the end because he's just damaged so many relationships. So moving on to the immunity challenge. It was really interesting. This is such a prime example of why you never take immunity for granted. Emmett had already established himself as a challenge beast. You can't un-establish yourself as a challenge beast, unfortunately, even if you lose a couple in a row. Once you have that title, people want to get you out. If there's a chance to get you out, they will get you out. I know he obviously felt safe with George there and people wanting him to go, but you are never safe if you're a challenge beast. Andrew could step down because Andrew had a shield in Emmett. But Emmett, really should have tried harder. Obviously, he got voted out. You don't. There is some. I think there's some merit to a strategy where you don't try and dominate challenges so that you never get the label of challenge beast. But once you've got it, you're screwed. You've got to keep winning if you can. I did enjoy the chat. Andrew obviously becoming paranoid, thinking George is playing mind games, and Emmett just reassuring him, "No, mate, George is shit at challenges. He just sucks." Post challenge, very frustrating. Obviously, they laid out to us this was going to be Hayley's decision to make. She could go either way with either group. They're obviously split. Nothing really exciting happened there. It was all going to come down to what Hayley's decision was going to be. Them letting George and Cara find an idol was just completely unacceptable. Like, I don't know why no one else is looking. And even if you're not going to look, just babysit them and don't let them have it. It is basically written into Survivor rules that once an idol is played, a new one comes into the game. Now, I know the last one was a different type of idol, but there hadn't been an idol used since. There was an idol used, and I can't remember exactly when it was. Doesn't matter. But there's been an idol waiting to be found, and it's very frustrating that the others aren't attempting to find it. I know it might seem desperate or overcharged, but we're not, when you know that it's there, you've got to try and find it. So it's very frustrating seeing them allow them to get that idol. So we go to tribal. Now, before we get into it, does George believe any of the shit he says? Anything at all? He says it with such conviction and such confidence that it sounds true when he says these things. But when you actually look at what's happened, it's just a complete fabrication. Like, there's not even an ounce of truth to it. And I loved Emmett calling him out when he was like, Emmett's turned on me, Andrew's turned on me, like all these people are behaving different. It's like, well, maybe that would have to do with the fact that you keep backstabbing people, George. For Christ's sake. It is unbearable watching him say this stuff as if he believes it, and maybe he does. But he's talking, I've been consistent from the start. It's like, the fucking Taliban are consistent, mate. It doesn't make them good people. Like, you can't polish a turd, right, mate? You are such a duplicitous rodent, and it is frustrating that you think that you're some sort of like courageous, selfless person. The only person you care about is George, and that's okay. You're playing the game. I'm sure he's a much nicer person in real life, but for the game's sake, he's playing really hard. Great, good for you, mate. And he's playing strategically, or at least he thinks he is. That's fine, but just don't pretend. I mean, obviously you have to pretend, but do you really believe it? Anyway, the other thing is he sort of looks like a penis with the way he wears his buff, and I find that humorous. So Haley's sitting here, and everything rests with Haley. Like, I'm sure we could figure out the way in which Wei could swing this, but no one cares because Wei is a non-player. So the first part of Haley's decision has to be, when you look at George and Emmett, which one is the bigger threat? Emmett's obviously the biggest physical threat in the game. You don't get many opportunities to get them out. Now is a great time. With only 7 left, there's only 4 challenges to go. He could win every challenge and just force his way into the top 3. So I think that getting Emmett out makes a lot of sense here. On the other hand, you've got George, who's a strategic threat. The question is, would anyone actually vote for George? Will people respect his resume? Additionally, Haley is playing a strategic game, similar to George's. I think, generally speaking, when people weigh up strategic versus physical Survivor games, people always lean towards the strategic games. I think that people would favour Haley's strategic game over Emmett's challenge beast game. I really do. The other thing is, when you're up against another strategic player, you're comparing apples to apples, and I think it's much more difficult to separate yourself from that player. So on the one hand, both of them are big threats. One has to go. It's probably a 50-50 call. I don't really mind going either way there. You don't know that Emmett can't make some moves later in the game. You don't know that George can't continue to make moves, but you'll obviously be playing that same game as George. So then what it really comes down to is, what does the future look like for me? And I think this is where Haley's made the right decision. When Haley votes out Emmett, she's now in a majority with George, Cara, and Wei, and they can now pick off Danny, Flick, and Andrew. The problem with that is you've got George and Cara on your team, and you can't trust them as far as you can throw them. So, would I be surprised in the next episode if George goes straight over to those 3, to Andrew, Danny, and Flick, and say, Haley screwed you guys over, we've got to get her back, and ends up trying to orchestrate a blindside on Haley? I actually think that's almost certainly going to happen, but it's still better than the alternative, because she, in that instance, can still say, look, guys, this is George flip-flopping. If George gets me out, and then you've got 3, like, as soon as he can, he's going to get one of you. Like, George is going to flip-flop the whole way through, and if we allow him to do it, he's going to end up having a really impressive resume. So I think that George is still the natural next vote out. If she were to vote George out now, then she ends up facing, she's in a 3 with Wei and Cara, and on the bottom of the 5 with Emmett, Flick, Danny, and Andrew. And those 3, Danny, Flick, and Emmett, would be mad not to keep Wei and Kara around. So it would be insane to vote one of those guys out. They're so useful to you in the end. If you can get both of those two to the end, and you're the only one, you win $500,000. That's got to be. Everyone's got to be sitting there with dollars in their eyes, looking at Wei and Kara at this stage of the game. So I think that you've got to. I think that Hayley, knowing that, well, if I get George out, basically I think that 5 will turn on me immediately. So she's now got the 2 goats in her side, which is a huge cash in the bank thing to have. Problem is that Kara is so loyal to George that I don't know how she's going to have to navigate that. There's going to have to be a time where, she now, in this now situation with their 4 alliance, she has to get rid of one of the 3 minority first. Because if she tries to get out George now, it goes to a 3v3. Kara will flip because Kara will be pissed off at people for George's allies for voting George out. So she needs to get out. Let's say it's Danny next, gets Danny out. Then it's only Andrew and Flick. And then she can work with Wei, Andrew, and Flick to get George out. So it's getting dicey now, but this is Survivor. This is what happens at the point end of the game. The other thing is the idol was not played. Interesting by Kara not to play the idol. George obviously thought she was definitely going to play it for him. I don't know why she didn't. So that's going to be really interesting because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Kara's not as tied to George as I thought. Maybe Kara's prepared to keep that. Well, maybe she's not as weird and empathetically stupid as we thought. She goes, I have an idol now. I'm in the final 7. I'm not a big threat. I can basically use this to guarantee my way in. Now, Kara's, barring a miracle, I can't see Kara doing enough to be a contender to win it all. So, big whoop. But it is interesting that she's going to have that idol. And her and George are going to be difficult if it's not managed correctly. So that's Australian Survivor Desktop Episode 3. We got a couple of days off. I'll try and get a few other pieces out. We'll look ahead at the contenders, see whose path to victory is the most simple from here or is the most straightforward. I've also got a Survivor thesis I want to share with you guys. So thank you for your time. Let's get George out.